Governments love to tell you that they are working for your financial freedom. They talk about stability, growth, opportunities, and advantages. But if you look even a little closer at history, you will see something much darker and deeper. Governments have always used hidden financial tactics to keep ordinary people poor while concentrating wealth and power in their own hands. And the shocking part is that these tactics are never new. For centuries, they have been repackaged, decorated with different concepts, sold under new names, but always used for the same purpose and in the same service, to transfer wealth upward and keep the majority dependent. Let's start with the oldest and simplest tactic, inflation. When a government spends more than it can collect through taxes, it has two options. Either it accepts the truth and openly taxes its citizens, which is politically dangerous and damages political careers, or it quietly and sneakily devalues the currency, gradually reducing the value of every coin and banknote in circulation. Ancient Rome mastered this tactic, which was the subject of our previous video. In the 3rd century AD, when emperors faced rising military expenses, they began reducing and degrading the silver content of the denarius, the currency of the time. A coin that was once nearly pure silver eventually turned into a piece of copper with a thin layer of silver on top. The empire behaved as if nothing had changed, as if everything was normal, but everyone holding those coins paid the price of this devaluation. Inflation soared. Savings melted away, wages couldn't keep up. This was a silent and sneaky tax on the population, a tactic still used today, only now with modern central banks instead of imperial mints. The Middle Ages brought another version of this sneaky game, forced loans. Kings in England, France, and Spain pressured wealthy merchants and guilds to lend money to the state. Of course, these were not voluntary or willing loans. Refusing meant fines, confiscation of property, or worse. Sometimes the state promised to repay with interest, but repayment was usually late and made with devalued rotten currency, or never came at all. The government continued its wars and palaces, while merchants had no choice but to surrender their capital. The tactic here was presenting coercion as if it were patriotism or a sense of national duty, and it worked for centuries. By the 17th century, the financial system itself turned into a trick. When Britain founded the Bank of England in 1694, it was never out of goodwill. They needed money to fight France. Rich investors bought government bonds, and in return, the crown guaranteed interest payments through taxes. This may look like a fair deal, but who paid those taxes? Ordinary people, through taxes on goods like salt, beer, and cloth. The rich lent money to the government and earned safe interest. The poor paid even higher taxes to finance those interest payments. It was a wealth transfer system presented as national finance, and it built and solidified a system still alive today. The safest investments in the world are lending money to governments, and those returns are ultimately guaranteed by the labor and consumption of the public. In the modern world, the tricks are everywhere. Take budget deficits. Governments create massive debts, issuing bonds bought by investors, banks, and foreign powers. Politicians tell the public it is for infrastructure, employment, or social programs. But most of it flows into defense contractors, corporate subsidies, and bailouts. When it is time for repayment, governments don't cut spending at the top. They raise taxes, erode the currency through inflation, or cut social benefits. The trick is this: the debt looks like it is for the people, but while the burden falls on their shoulders, the profits go to the bondholders. And then there are bailouts. During the 2008 financial collapse, banks took irresponsible risks, turned toxic mortgages into securities, and brought the global economy to the brink of collapse. Who paid the price? Ordinary taxpayers through massive government bailouts. And who profited afterward? The very same banks, bigger and stronger than before. The trick is very simple. Profits were privatized, losses were socialized, and the public was told the system needed to be saved. Even the way governments manage pension and savings systems is a kind of illusion. In the US, Britain, and Europe, people have paid into government-run systems for decades, trusting that the money would be there when they retire. But governments do not actually save that money. They spend it immediately and leave a paper promise in its place. It is essentially a generational, fraudulent Ponzi scheme that assumes future taxpayers will pay the bill. It works until the population ages. Then the system becomes unsustainable. The government reforms it, usually by reducing benefits, raising the retirement age, or eroding the value of payments through inflation. Do you see the pattern? At every stage, the trick relies on perception. Inflation is presented as growth, forced loans as national duty, national debt as investment, bailouts as stability, pension cuts as reform. The language hides the truth, a transfer of wealth from the many to the few, from the bottom to the top. And history shows this trick has worked for centuries because most people don't know economic history, don't understand financial systems, and notice the trap only when it is too late. In recent decades, the tricks have become even more sophisticated. Think of quantitative easing, a term most people hadn't even heard before the 2008 crisis. Central banks rapidly created trillions of dollars, buying government bonds and mortgage-backed securities to stabilize markets. Politicians and bankers said it was necessary to prevent collapse. And for the financial system, it worked. Asset prices soared. Stocks, real estate, and bonds increased in value. But who owned most of those assets? The wealthy and the powerful. For ordinary households without large investments, the benefit was minimal, while the downside came in the form of distorted markets and rising living costs. The trick here was that money creation saved the system for those at the top, but increased inflation and inequality for everyone else. Another modern illusion is stealth taxation. Instead of openly raising income taxes, governments quietly collect taxes through mechanisms such as sales taxes, fuel taxes, and most importantly, inflation. When prices rise faster than wages, the gap is effectively a hidden tax on savings and purchasing power. Governments love inflation because it reduces the real value of their debts. But for citizens, it means the erosion of financial freedom. Even if your salary rises in nominal terms, if your expenses are rising faster, you are actually becoming poorer. This is not a flaw of the system. It is the system. Inflation is not merely an economic accident. It is one of the most consistent tricks governments use to shift the burden of their spending onto the public without them noticing. Then there is regulatory capture. In theory, regulations exist to protect the public. Financial rules, safety standards, consumer protections. But history repeatedly shows that powerful industries influence the agencies meant to regulate them. Railroads in the 19th century, oil companies in the 20th century, and today tech and finance giants all shape the rules for their own benefit. This is the national scale version of what the Peaky Blinders learned on the streets of Birmingham. It is easier to control the referee than to fight the game. Governments present regulation as a tool to protect the public, but behind the scenes, large corporations carve out areas that reduce competition and increase profit. The public sees protection. Insiders see profit. War financing is also an old trick in a new costume. During World War I and II, governments issued massive bonds and told citizens it was their patriotic duty to buy them. People thought they were supporting their nation, and they were. But these bonds also became risk-free investments for the wealthy, guaranteed by taxes. In the 21st century, the pattern continues. Trillions spent on the Iraq and Afghanistan wars were financed through debt, benefiting defense contractors, banks, and bondholders, while the cost was paid by ordinary taxpayers. The trick is this: wars are presented as temporary emergencies, but their financial burdens last for generations and are sold to you as national obligations. Governments also use complexity as a trick. Thousands of pages of tax codes, financial instruments so complicated that even professionals struggle to explain them, budgets full of jargon, All of this makes it impossible for ordinary citizens to track the flow of money. Complexity becomes camouflage. When the wealth transfer is invisible, you cannot oppose it. You cannot even see it. In ancient Rome, debased coins were the physical sign of the trick. Today it's balance sheets filled with acronyms and incomprehensible programs, designed in ways ordinary people will never understand. The trick is the same. Make it too complex for the public to follow, and the transfer continues unnoticed. Why does this matter now? Because the tricks are still alive and accelerating. Inflation melts your savings, your wealth, and your future. Debt burdens grow like a snowball each year. Bailouts are still the first reflex when markets tremble. Central banks continue manipulating the money supply. And governments load the costs onto the public in such indirect ways that most people never make the connection. They don't even think about it. The result is a dirty system that forces you to work more for less real wealth while empowering the financial elite. History's lesson is not just that these tricks exist, but that they always return. When Roman coins were devalued, citizens suffered. When kings demanded forced loans, merchants lost fortunes. When modern states use inflation and debt, households bear the burden. Different eras, same mechanism. And here is the harsh truth. Most people will never escape these tricks in their lifetime because they don't even realize they are being toyed with inside a system. They see inflation as natural, taxes as unavoidable, bailouts as mercy. In short, they never lift their heads out of the fishbowl. They believe government messaging. They don't study economic history. And that ignorance is the most powerful trick of all. When people forget the past, they cannot recognize its repetition. That's why governments and elites prefer a population that is uneducated, uninformed, and ignorant about finance. Financial education is resistance. Economic history is a weapon. If you know the tricks, it becomes harder to manipulate you, and that is exactly what they don't want. So what should you take away? First, always look beyond the headline. When governments announce stimulus, ask who benefits first, which group gains. When inflation rises, remember it is not just bad luck. Think about what kind of games may be happening behind the scenes. It is policy. When regulations appear, ask who wrote them and who benefits. Second, build real wealth outside the traps. Assets that can hold value even when the currency loses its worth. These protect your labor. Third, do not assume the system serves you. The system exists to protect itself, not you. History does not repeat exactly, but if you don't understand it, it will crush you the same way every time. Knowing history is not enough. Interpreting it and learning from it matters. The sneaky financial tricks that kept Roman citizens poor are the same ones emptying your bank account and devaluing your savings today, only dressed in modern language. The only difference is whether you recognize them in time. If this gave you a new perspective and a new way of thinking, subscribe. Look at history. History will never mislead you.